Hello, bonjour, namaste. Welcome to the Canada and India show, where we meet the people that make up the vibrant Canada-India relationship. Every week, we interview leaders in their fields to dive into who they are and what drives them. From the arts, to trade, to human rights, we will discover together how rich and diverse this relationship really is.
Hi, I'm Annie Dubé, Canada's Consul General in Mumbai, India, and you are listening to the Canada in India show. Thank you for joining us. We begin season 2 of the Canada in India show with a personality who truly lives the Canada-India love every single day. Lisa Ray, an Indo-Canadian author, a global citizen, an activist, and the way she describes herself on Twitter, an accidental actor, and mama to souffler. Lisa began her modeling career in the early 1990s and has also acted in many international films, including the Oscar-nominated Canadian film Water. Today, Lisa shares with us her Indo-Canadian life, starting from early childhood of Kolkata to her first experience with the glamour of Bollywood, her life between both countries, and her first book, the memoir Close to the Bone. We took plenty of time to discuss, as I found her journey very fascinating. So join me as I welcome Lisa Ray. Lisa Ray, welcome to the show.
Hello, Annie. I'm so happy to be here. I've been waiting actually for this opportunity.
I should have called before.
Everything happens in its exact right time.
Right. Sure. There's a few things I want to talk about, but first I have to say your book, Close to the Bone, is amazing. I finished reading it yesterday with a few tears in my eyes. So well written, so touching. In fact, deeply touching. And all along, I was like, my God, your dad is such a good sport, going along with your things of like, let's go and buy a house in Nelson, BC. And he's just going along. I thought, oh my God, I would love to have your dad along with this.
Oh my gosh. Well, he's in Bombay. We should call him in one day as well. But he's got so much of India and Canada in him as well. So he's also, I think that has influenced his decision-making in life and made him the incredible human being that he is today.
So if we go back a bit in history, you start the book with you're in your teenage years, and then you come to India first time you're maybe 15 or 16.
Yes.
And your father is originally from Kolkata, discovering India from there first. You've mentioned a bit your impressions there, but India back then, what was it for you?
It was such a dramatically, I want to say dramatically different nation. And at the same time, there are certain timeless aspects of India that have not changed, I think, in probably, hundreds of years. So, there's always a deep connection to India inside me, one that even used to puzzle my own parents, actually, because we used to go to Calcutta on childhood trips. And we used to have to schedule them during my summer vacation, which, of course, is, one of the best seasons to be in Canada, one of the worst seasons of all to be in Calcutta, especially in the late 80s and the early 90s. Because, first of all, the roads used to get absolutely flooded with monsoon. There used to be load shedding, what we call load shedding, when the electricity used to go off as well. I still remember fanning myself, lying on the bed and fanning myself and sort of, trying to struggling for air. But it was, as I said, such a different nation. In those days, this was a pre-liberalization of India. So one of the other interesting cultural events that used to take place, and I think that a lot of Indo-Canadians and a lot of the Indian diaspora can relate to this when I say that we used to have to carry a lot of things to gift our family in Calcutta.
I think it's still true. The culture of gifting.
Yeah, no. This incredible generosity of spirit. And I love that aspect of Indian culture. However, in what I'm referring to is in the 80s, a lot of things that were available in the West were just not available in India. It was basically a closed socialist economy. So I still remember my cousin, asking for a Sony Walkman. Like that was sort of the height of sophistication And we used to pack boom boxes and, these sorts of really interesting items that were part of our everyday life in Canada and were coveted in India at that time. And on the reverse, we used to then empty our luggage and, give all the gifts to our relatives. But then we used to fill our luggage with these special sandalwood soaps and special agarbatti, the incense sticks, because in those days that was not easily available in Canada, so it's a strange mule kind of situation going on. And it's interesting because I think that a lot of immigrant communities in Canada can relate to this.
Yeah.
Particularly, I'm speaking about maybe the Indo-Canadian community, but I'm sure that a lot of immigrant communities can relate to that exchange program. And it was a different kind of exchange of goods. So that was one thing I remember. And at the same time, I was very attracted to this very raw, very real, very rough around the edges kind of atmosphere that I found in Calcutta in the 80s. And it didn't really make a lot of sense because I think I'm very fortunate to have had a very safe and secure and privileged upbringing in the suburbs of Toronto. Looking back on it, of course, it's something that now when I have my own kids and I look at it and I think, so many things I grew up with that I took for granted that even my own children can't take for granted, riding my bicycle around the neighborhood and playing in the local park and feeling safe and secure and being very connected with nature, with the natural world, which I think really is also one of Canada's greatest strengths, even today. And so there was that. But you know how it is. We always take for granted what we have in our own backyard. And so this very rough and tumble and, things peeling off of the sides of buildings and it looks like something's going to fall and hit you on the head and, all of these things and the cycle rickshaw wallas. I was fascinated as a child and I can't really give you a rational reason for it. Maybe, this was like the two bloodlines in me somewhere were longing for expression in the world. I'm neither, because my mother, of course, as you pointed out, is Polish. My father's Bengali Indian. They met in the UK and they ended up immigrating to Canada. And it's also a very touching story. So I have sort of East and West in me. And I guess that has continued to be a theme in my life. But it was established in my childhood on these trips back and forth.
And I can understand the comment you made about the worst time to get to India is during the monsoon time. I thought it was just nowadays it was more happening, but it seems that even in the 80s, people were feeling it.
It was, yes.
From there, you went back and forth, summer vacations, going to India, then going back to Canada for the school years and all. At one point, you ended up in Bombay. And overnight, you became a sensation. And you learned of it later because internet was not really working at that point. But it just became like you were it.
It's sort of a very surreal situation if we reflect on it today from the vantage point of the way the world is today. But, in 1991, how would you know that you are famous on the other side of the world unless somebody actually picked up a rotary phone and called you? And that was literally the situation that I found myself in. It was unexpected. It was sort of an interesting era, I think both in the world. The world was obviously less connected, but maybe just slightly more, how do I put it? There was a sense of adventure and a little bit more of innocence, perhaps, because we were a little bit less exposed to, what we're exposed to today. And I was always an adventurer. That was just very firmly embedded in me. And I think it was passed on through my parents, actually, who were the original rebels. And so I was always seeking adventure, but, knowing that my family and Canada was there as sort of my safety net behind me. But in Bombay, man, you have no safety net. You just throw yourself in there. But when I came to Bombay as a young girl and someone literally spotted me at a party and said, "Hey, do you want to model?" It was one of those moments which took me aback because I'd never thought about it in my life. It was so far from my personal experience, from my family's experience of life. But I couldn't help but think, could be fun. Let me try it. Let's go on an adventure. I do have this sense of wonder and curiosity that sometimes works out well, sometimes gets me into trouble for sure. So after being spotted by someone in Bombay, I ended up doing a little bit of modeling, but then I went back to Canada intending to begin my first year of university, actually at U of T. Mm-hmm. And literally just a week before I was supposed to begin, tragedy struck, and my family and I were involved in a very serious car accident, actually outside of Toronto in probably what is Caledon today. And for sure, it was a seminal, watershed moment. I think I still carry a little bit of that trauma in me because, to come from this very safe, idyllic childhood where I was very untouched by any sort of difficulties and pain, and then suddenly be launched into this new reality was very difficult also at that age. And then simultaneously on the other side of the planet, my images were released on a cover of a magazine, a popular magazine at the time. And I became, for lack of a better word, an overnight sensation. Mm-hmm. And, it's one of those situations that, I think also used to happen in Hollywood back in the day, maybe in the 30s and the 40s, and actually doesn't really happen anymore because the entertainment industry today is such a efficient kind of machine that a lot of the people who enter it are sort of groomed and they know exactly what they want. But in those days, I like saying that we were like the last of the flower children. We were kind of bumbling our way through life, just trying to figure it out, not really with a very goal or achievement-oriented plan, but I did have a vision for my life. I knew I wanted to have a lot of varied, myriad experiences. So that's why I say, thank you for pointing it out, Annie. My career started in a very, very unusual, strange way.
It started strong. Like you didn't have like the baby steps. You just went for it.
It was literally that overnight kind of suddenly you're a star, and then suddenly people were chasing me. People were trying to track me down. But remember, when your mother is in the ICU and the phone rings at 2 a.m., your stomach drops. You feel like it can only be bad news. So I still remember stumbling, even today, stumbling to the kitchen phone and picking it up. And suddenly I would hear, those very particular Indian noises in the background.
Yes.
And it would be some Bollywood producer trying to find Lisa Ray, trying to leLisa Ray a film. And it was just, as I said, one of those completely surreal moments in your life that, just happened.
So your career started really strong and it went strong from there. Through the book, you go through the internal process that you have to face, like discovering yourself. You started your career really young. You were probably 16 or something.
Yes.
But then also internally, how do you deal with all the overnight sensation, being recognized, having all this attention from Bollywood producers and so on? But also dealing with your family and the shock that happened, your car accident, your mother, and then being able to become yourself. And the book really shows the journey you went through internally. And this is so deeply touching in terms of, oh my God, it's like, we're not alone in this world going through that. And I found that very refreshing because so many people don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you. You're making me actually a little teary now because it's so gratifying to hear that, finally in this form of expression through the words, I'm finally able to, I think, connect and to transcend all of the labels that have been placed on me, particularly in India. I sort of wanted to back up a little bit in what you were, in what you started with, is that, of course, I was labeled very early as sort of very glamorous and a sex symbol at a time in India where there were very few, and there wasn't a lot of access to images outside the country. And none of this was done with my consent. And none of this was really, it was just something that happened. And of course, I was very young, and you're still very unsure about yourself and vulnerable. And, and I was carrying this deep inner trauma as well. And at the same time, I also want to point out that on reflection, I was also very Canadian, so there was this sort of this inner struggle between being put on this pedestal or being launched into a world that was obviously very glamorous and very appealing, but also very foreign to me. And not by that, I don't mean it was the Indian aspect. It was the aspect of celebrity and glamour and how you are meant to carry yourself. As, in India, we still have a bit of a stratified society. So, a star is sort of the top of the heap, and you're expected to have an entourage around you. You're not expected to speak to regular people even in those days. And I think the Canadian in me just couldn't reconcile myself to that. I was very deeply uncomfortable with that because I would still pinch myself and say, I'm exactly the same. What has changed is only people's perceptions about me. So I always struggled with that. It was a deep inner struggle to be able to also try to share a little bit of who I was as a human being, not as a label or as an image on a magazine cover, at a time when it was not easy to do that. It was not easy to be able to, as a woman in India as well, to have a voice, to be able to challenge the status quo, to tell people, to try to be taken seriously, to say that, yes, I can do this. Sure, and I enjoyed it, obviously, modeling and getting dressed up and looking pretty. But there is so much more to me. There are other layers to me. And at that time, women were really typecast in India, very, very strongly typecast.
Yeah, I was about to ask because you mentioned in one of the pages, I think it's this one, 115, where Bollywood at the time was a world away from advertising. It was difficult to bridge the differences. It wasn't so much the statecraft that was hard for me. It was the role that a woman was required to slip into during meetings, one that conferred all the power on a male actor. Act demure and coquettish, eat your tongue, laugh at their jokes, diminish yourself. Is it still the case in Bollywood?
That's a very good question. I think I've always been the perennial outsider as well. I've never been deeply embedded in Bollywood, even though when, I started, and a lot of my contemporaries and people I would consider friends were people like Aamir Khan and Shah Rukh Khan and Aishwarya. And of course, they took a different path and different choices. But it was also no big deal because, as I said, it was a much smaller industry in the 90s. We were all friends. Today, there's a lot of layers of people between us. Now, I'm sure that still to an extent exists, let's say the statecraft. Mm-hmm. I am seeing a very encouraging trend, personally, with the evolution of roles for women in, let's say, broadly, not just Bollywood or Hindi films, but now what's great is the digital era, these digital series that are being produced for Netflix and Amazon and coming out of India. They're just doing a superb job. I love that content. And I think that that's where you're seeing a lot more experimentation with female roles. And I think, look, the entertainment industry, wherever you go in the world, is a tough industry. Right. And I think you're always going to be faced with choices as a woman. And I really don't begrudge anyone the choices that they make. However, I think that we're seeing a lot more strong women. And what's really also changing the game is women also in a decision-making position, right? More women behind the camera who are able to call the shots, literally, whether they're producers or writers or directors. That is also going to change the dynamic because these are strong, evolved, empowered women who want to see themselves also in screen, to be honest. I've been a part of an Amazon series called 4 More Shots, Please. And we just recently shot the second season. So I am extraordinarily excited about the release of the second season. even though I don't do a lot of on-camera work anymore. But because this series, and one of the reasons why I also agreed to do it, because to be honest, I'm a little lazy now at this stage of my life. It's really hard work. Let me tell you, the 14, 16-hour days, and I'm always inevitably the oldest person on the set. Everybody is half my age, and I quite laugh about it, but they have a lot more energy than me. But one of the reasons why I definitely wanted to be a part of this series and why I think it's pathbreaking is because it's produced by a woman, it's directed by a woman. The director of photography is a woman. The writers are women. And the main characters, the central characters, are all women. And that's what's changing the dynamic.
It's a great era to be in the cinema, in the movies, in the series, because if you have yourself reflected in the stories, it makes it even more entertaining for everybody. It's not just serving a certain side of the audience. It's not by male, for male.
No, exactly. And then, traditionally in India, the industry was always about the mass. They were always about the big numbers. Now, India is so diverse and huge. And if you're trying to appeal to everybody, you're going to have to dumb things down, inevitably, And, I don't think I'm saying anything controversial by saying that. It was always like broad humor, stereotypes in terms of the characters. That were often, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that continues. But for such a huge country with such deep layers of culture and so many diverse stories to tell, we need other forms of storytelling. And so that was always my contention, not just this. We need to expand the other types of cinema so that you can make smaller, more, whatever you want to call it, indie films that are perhaps appealing to, a certain smaller audience, but they'll find their audience. You want to see you reflected on screen.
And this is something you touch on in the book when you mentioned that so many movies you turned down because you didn't feel it was you being able to create the impact you wanted to create in the world. And so one movie that you touch particularly on in the book is Water by Deepa Mehta. How did it affect you shooting that movie?
I still stand by the fact that that's probably been, again, the most important professional experience of my life. It did transform me. And so I feel literally blessed to have had that, because I think also as an actor or someone in this business, you hope that one day you'll have that kind of experience. But unfortunately, there's no formula to it. There's really no formula. It's one of the most... how can I put it? It's one of the most unpredictable and from that point of view, harrowing businesses to be in, because even if you stick to the formula, the product will still not necessarily hit the mark. So Water was one of those magical experiences. And strangely enough, so Deepa actually is one of the reasons why I ended up leaving India and ended up going to drama school and starting to take the whole acting business a little bit more seriously, because she's been such an incredible mentor. And she also, I think that we related to each other, again, being of Indo-Canadian origin. She loves India, but she loves it so much, and she's such a frank, truthful person that she also calls India out on what she sees are its flaws. She obviously, and I think it just comes from deep love and commitment to a culture and a country that you love, because I feel the same way. But anyway, so she spotted me I was still in Bombay. So much in my life has just happened randomly, you know what I mean? It's kind of kooky when I think about it. So she offered me a film called Bollywood Hollywood. And it was actually the film that she directed in order to soothe herself after the trauma of going through the first time that she attempted to direct Water in India, when it was shut down by fundamentalists and there was a big controversy. So then she wanted to do something lighthearted, and she roped me in for Bollywood Hollywood, and that already started changing things for me. First of all, I think I'm very lucky that I've worked with so many female directors. That's another thing that's just happened randomly. Because obviously they won't objectify, the women on the, you're not subject to the male gaze. And I've been, incredibly lucky to have had that kind of professional experience. And then cut to, maybe a year and a half or 2 years later. And I decided to leave India and go to drama school. And I wanted to almost reinvent myself. I loved Bombay. It was very difficult. It was not an easy decision, but there were many aspects of living in Bombay where I felt suffocated. I was also, very frankly, suffering from a food eating disorder. I was bulimic with all the pressures around me. I had not addressed the trauma that I had gone through. So all of that just started to build up, and I just decided that I had to leave. I had to leave my comfort zone. And I ended up in London, and I went to drama school. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, Deepa sent me an email, and it was Christmas time. And Deepa's very also blunt to the, very blunt and to the point. Mm-hmm. And I remember in the subject line, it said River Moon. And I said, oh, River Moon. She says, here's a script, read it, tell me if you like it and you want to be a part of it. That was it. Okay.
Clear instructions.
And as soon as I started reading it, I realized, oh my God, this is water. This is that divine. And it was one of the most lyrical scripts that I've ever read in my life. I was also weeping at the end of it. So I sent her a huge yes, sent her back basically an email and just said a huge yes with like lots of exclamation marks. So two things had to take place after that to ensure, that I could be a part of the movie. One was she had to actually convince, this was a Telefilm Canada, also partially financed film. Mm-hmm. So obviously she did have to send a video and explain why she's chosen this actress who doesn't seem to be very suitable on the surface of it for the role of a simple village widow in the 1930s in India. And I'll never forget the fact that we met in Delhi at the time, and I was, on a event, and we were in a 5-star hotel, and she dressed me in a simple widow white. And so sitting on this plush carpet in a 5-star hotel, she just videoed me, and I was trying to, put myself in a very situation, like literally transport myself into a village floor, and still room service was coming and going in the background. And it was very strange and surreal. That was one thing. And so the second thing is I had to convince the principal of my drama school to allow me to go off and film.
Which they did. So that's great.
Which finally she did, because normally they don't allow students to take on professional jobs while you're studying at drama school in London. They're very particular about it. So again, I think the universe just conspired to support me in this endeavor, and water happened. And literally, I think that also changed everything for me as an actor, but also on a human level. It's just, I carry the most exquisite memories, the most exquisite idea also of working together, because I always felt that, first of all, cinema can be used as a tool for change and a tool for compassion and empathy and good. And this proved me right. And also as an actor, that when you completely surrender and dedicate yourself and take your ego out of the equation, you can create magic on screen.
It's true. The way you describe it in the book is something about the collegiality of all the actors together. Yes. There was the same status system or the hierarchy, and everybody was in it together. So it seemed like a great experience, obviously. Another thread in the book is about your personal journey, going through some retreats, doing the tour in rural India, going in Dharamsala. And what were you trying to find, and did you find it?
That's a very good question. That is a question I always hope I won't be asked, but it's a very good question. I'll have to back up a little bit. I think that I have always had this very seeking aspect to my inner world of asking the big questions and, attempting to find answers. And for some time, part of that also, I think, came from my healing journey of trying to heal myself of this inner trauma from, for instance, the car accident, where I never really came to terms with it. I never came to terms with, what happened, how my mother changed physically, and even the trauma I went through. So part of the journey was that. Part of the journey was really, as I said, trying to ask the big questions. And I think that in a strange way, having experienced at such a young age success, or what we define as success in the world, like what do we, the society sort of sells us on this package, success is money, fame, reputation, people chasing you and offering you things, getting the best seat in the restaurant, etc. And in a weird way, I experienced that when I was literally in my late teens. And at the same time, that was when I was going through my deepest, darkest period emotionally, and as a human being, I was broken. So it makes you question, is that really success? I got everything that is supposed to make me happy, and I'm not happy. In fact, that was, as I said, the darkest period of my life. So that set me, I think, on a path of questioning. If this is not happiness, then where is it? Where is lasting happiness? And that sent me to many different places. Of course, India is an extraordinarily fertile country for spiritual seeking of any sort. And I was really, really happy to do that. And that was a really important part of my self-development. And I feel that that's a gift that India gave me that I probably wouldn't have found anywhere else in the world to the extent that I did in India, because there is still this idea of the sacredness. Every part of India has different rituals, different, ways of approaching worship, and different ways of working with your mind and your spirit. And so you could spend more than a lifetime doing that. But I found a lot of healing in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And not, I think, at the expense of other traditions, but I ended up in Dharamshala in McLeodganj, of course, which is where the exiled Tibetan government is situated today. And I'll never forget it. I'll try to tell the story quickly, because I actually ended up, I was actually shooting, interestingly, I was shooting a film called Cooking with Stella.
I love that movie.
And we shot it in Canada House.
Yeah, I know, because my friend, her daughter was your daughter in the movie.
No way! I love these threads. You're kidding me. I actually found a picture of that. She was the sweetest little thing. She was this big. I'm sure she's much bigger now.
She's now in Mexico, for your information.
Oh my God. So I had just finished shooting Cooking with Stella, and it was a wonderful experience, but there was still just something restless, something that I felt was wrong inside. So I ended up going up to Dharamshala with a couple of friends. And the first day that we landed there, I saw a sign on the side of a post, and it said 10-day silent meditation retreat, introduction to Tibetan Buddhism. I'd never really done anything like that. I've been doing yoga and many other practices. And I looked at it, and something inside me just turned. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do this. So imagine I've come there with a couple of friends who wanted to hang out. They said, what are we supposed to do? I said, have some momos and go hiking. And there's lots to do in McLeodganj because, it's very much sort of a backpackers kind of area. So I went in for 10 days and I came out, and my friends obviously gathered around me and they said, how was it?
Can you talk now after
and
10
I said,
days?
Yeah, after 10 days. So I opened my mouth and I said, you know what? It was the most terrifying, horrible thing I've ever done in my life. And I'm going back.
Wow.
And it was because, you know what it was? Sitting with yourself and working with your mind, to be honest, for me has been the most healing thing. It's transformed my life. And it gave me the tools unknowingly to be able to deal with the challenges that were coming, that were ahead of me, but also to deal with years of trauma that were behind me. And it really was such an effective, simple, but very difficult practice. And that being in silence and sitting with yourself, not running away, not keeping busy, which I had been doing for most of my life to avoid dealing with myself and my pain and anything else, but sitting with myself in an atmosphere of compassion as well, because the Tibetan Buddhists practice a form of Buddhism that's called Mahayana, which is it's very compassion based. So there's there's the Hinayana and the Mahayana. Mahayana is considered the big vehicle and Hinayana is the small vehicle. And it's not one at the expense of the other, but Mahayana says that you liberate yourself in order to liberate others. You become a bodhisattva and you choose to stay in the world to practice compassion and to release others from their suffering. So it's just such I still remember sitting there once. And when the teacher was a nun, and she was a foreigner, I think she was German. And when she started talking about compassion and how our essential nature as human beings is actually, it's like crystal. We're pure and we're good and we're compassionate and we become confused in life. You know, it's like the mirror becomes covered with dirt and all we have to do is clear it away to be able to see ourselves. I just remember having such a cathartic release and crying because I felt like it took me back to my childhood where something in me instinctively thought that that is what life is, that we are all good. Your life is for me. Life is good. We are good human beings. Sometimes we do the wrong action, for sure, and there should be consequences, but it's not that life is bad and there are bad people. And it brought me back to that childhood instinct. And I said, it was like coming home. It was such a relief because I do feel that often in the world, here's one thing that I think connects both India, Canada, and the rest of the world. We are often taught in society that somehow life is against you. Life is a struggle and you have to struggle and that, my success is at the expense of someone else's success. It's sort of that feeling of lack, and fear-based thinking, and we have to cut that across all societies. And this was the antidote.
So was it a way for you to define for yourself what success means for you in your life? What type of successful life do you want to live so that you can live in that direction so that you don't need to live success for others but for yourself?
Exactly. You really should be an interviewer. I have to tell you. I wish I could do most of my interviews. Honestly, it's so good. It's really...
I was inspired by your book, I have to say.
No, I want to share that with you sincerely. I'm not being, trying to flatter you because I think that, you have to understand a little bit deeper what I'm trying to get at. And yes, that is, I think, my most essential learning is to be able to redefine everything for yourself, to find that inner compass. And, of course, that's a very big part of who I am today and what maybe my message that I try to share with people, because I do travel also around India and even Canada, talking about my experiences. And, I start with cancer, but then I talk about how I was able to redefine success, So for me, that has been a game changer. Taking back that definition of success for myself, it's given me a sense of peace and fulfillment that I think I never would have gotten. And again, it's going to be different for everybody. But today, at least I know, by nature, I'm an introvert, for instance. I can put on the aspects of being an extrovert, but I need time to myself. That's very important. Otherwise, I hit a wall. And I'm unhappy then to be around people instead of enjoying myself. Writing, for instance, has been my childhood dream. My childhood aspiration has been to be a writer.
You mentioned that in the book, and I thought this is so great that after all this detour, you gathered enough experience to go back to what you were looking for.
And, so that's also an expression of redefining success because, a lot of people wouldn't necessarily see that. They would say, oh, but you have experienced success as an actor or in this line. I said, it's been very good to me. I am very thankful for everything that my career around the world, both in India and Canada, has given to me. But I know that my inner compass is pointing me in the direction of writing as a form of creativity and self-expression. So that's another way of taking back and redefining success for myself.
I want to touch on something else. There's another thread in the book that I want to touch on. It's your love life.
Yes.
And it seemed like a struggle and, attracting the wrong man most of the time.
Yeah.
And really the challenge of deciding if you want to let yourself go and be in that relationship or protect yourself all the time. And so you've had some relationships here in Mumbai, in London, back in Canada, and anywhere. Like through the book, we can see Mr. X, Mr. A, Mr. So-and-so. And in the end, you seem to realize that, okay, this is my contribution to why these relationships fails.
Yeah.
And so being able to come around and say, okay, well, I don't want to do that mistake with Jason.
It's been a long journey. I think I really am a late bloomer, though. I really had to go through a lot of experiences, which makes for a good book, but, you know, was sometimes very challenging in my real life. But yeah, of course, I had a lot of difficult relationships, and I'm not assigning blame on anyone, and I also own my part in it. But, you know, I think that one of the also turning points for me was understanding that first I have to love myself. You know, I mean, we are also taught that, or, you know, we're fed this fairy tale that somehow love is outside of you. You have to find it. You find the man, and then you have the wedding, and, you know, and then everything rolls out beautifully. And I think that fortunately in today's world, we're getting a lot more real about it. We're redefining partnership and companionship and redefining marriage. And Canada, of course, is at the forefront of that. And that's incredible. And, you know, hopefully that'll trickle down to India because, you know, I think it's really about having agency over your choice. Right? At the end of the day, what works for you. I met Jason at a time in my life which was perfect for me. We got married much later. We were both 40. But, you know, sometimes we reflect probably if we met maybe a year before that, it may not have worked out. It was also timing. But it was also about me acknowledging the patterns that were running through me, that were running my life when it came to relationships. All the, you know, various triggers like, I love you, come close, but not too close. Come close, but not too close. It was like this whole push-pull thing that is very difficult to be in relationship with. So I had to address that. That was my work. And I wanted to, when I met Jason, I realized that this really is the companion for me on so many levels. But I had to fix myself. And that was an ongoing process. And to an extent, it's an ongoing process. You know, we do call ourselves on that, and we have to have those frank discussions, and you have to constantly readjust and reset. But yeah, he's definitely the man that I liked saying that he gave me wings, and at the same time he holds my string. He grounds me, you know.
Interesting.
Which is something that someone like me who's a bit, you know, flighty and always like the wind moving, I really, really needed it. Mm-hmm. But I also needed to come to him as a whole person, loving myself, to be able to give love, not try to find love from that person. And there's another thing that we like saying. There's Jason, there's Lisa, and then there's the us. And that's a different entity. And we feed the us, but we try to maintain our individuality as well. And
because you're two successful people. And I mentioned earlier before we started recording, this is such a typical Canadian love story.
Yes,
Jason is originally from Lebanon,
yes.
And you, with your dual origins of India and Poland,
yeah.
Both becoming Canadians and finding your way to each other. I thought there's not a lot of places in the world where this type of meeting in the like the meeting of the souls, like where would that happen if it's not Canada?
No, you're absolutely right. It sort of is that. From that point of view, the quintessential Canadian love story, you know, maybe that'll be the title of the next book. But it's also remarkable because a little bit of Jason's background, I mean, they had to leave Lebanon or Beirut during the Civil War, and they became refugees. They lost everything and then rebuilt everything in Canada. And that's also really a testament, I think, to also the power of what Canada can offer. So there's him coming from that angle, and then there's me who was born in Canada and at the receiving end of the great stability and everything like that, went off to seek my adventure and yet came back to Canada. That's really where I was healed and always kept kept one foot in Canada for sure. So also coming from these very diverse backgrounds, absolutely, where would it happen? Where would it happen? And at the same time felt very normal as well. It wasn't like I went around saying, yeah, you know, my fiance is Lebanese. I know it's kind of weird. There was nothing weird about it, particularly in Toronto where we met, which of course is one of, I think, the most diverse cosmopolitan cities in the world, bar none.
It is. I hope you still have the tea house in Nelson, BC.
I do. I'm never, ever going to get rid of the tea house.
This,
ever.
To me, when I read all your road around India to find peace and all, and then you found a place also in Canada where Nelson seemed to be, You refer to the First Nations as well. There's something about the
It's
space.
a healing ground, yes, for the First Nations as well. And it's such a strong presence. And Nelson, it just happened to me, courtesy of a very old Canadian friend. And it was while I was actually recovering from my stem cell transplant post my first round with cancer that she called up and said, come and stay with us in Nelson. I said, where the hell is Nelson? I couldn't even find it on a map. And I landed there and I immediately felt like this was my place. And this was also very eye-opening for me to understand what is also, the riches that are available in Canada. Even having been brought up on the East Coast, I wasn't even as familiar with the West Coast. And I felt like this is home. This is where I want to have a home so that, God knows, because, life is unpredictable, but I do feel that today, for instance, I want to take my daughters there and start spending, when they're a little bit bigger, spend the summers in Nelson, because it's, I think, one of the top small arts town in Canada. There's a lot of healers. There's an IT community there. It's just one of those incredible little towns. And to talk about the natural beauty, my God, you just feel like you've landed in heaven. And so pristine. The other thing that happens, of course, is that you have to take a smaller plane from either Vancouver or from Calgary. As soon as you land in Castlegar and you come off the plane and you walk directly on the tarmac, I get high off of the air because it's so pristine. And I think you know what I'm talking about. When you live in Asia, this is something you want to bottle up and take with you around the world. And it's something that we shouldn't take for granted in Canada or anywhere in the world, that incredible untouched nature and, the purity of the land. So I really treasure that. And that is also a very healing place for me. And I got my little tea house there. Never give it up. I'll never give it up.
Fantastic. You obviously mentioned in your book your struggle with cancer. How is your health now?
Thank you for asking. It is, touch wood, I feel in my own mind that I'm cured, but I am on ongoing medication.
Okay.
And I check in regularly. I get very regular blood tests. I have, you might say, a team of specialists around the world. I have my Canadian oncologist that I'm in touch with. I have, my Indian oncologist, where I go in for my blood tests. And, I consider myself, obviously, I think that one of the primary things that I had to learn is to become an empowered patient. I also have to learn to ask the right questions and take control of my health. I learned that the hard way, of course.
Your husband did a lot of Excel sheets to track your... I thought that was amazing.
He did. And maybe that's not my thing. But, I tune into my body. I've made a lot of lifestyle changes. I'm not so hard on myself. I practice compassion. I take time off to go on retreats. I was actually just at a beautiful retreat just about 2 weeks ago, also in India. And wherever, it's been a huge lesson, I think. And if I had to distill it down, it's also to self-love and self-compassion. And that's something that we need to practice a lot more in the world, because then that spreads to other people. So that was a big lesson for me. But yes, officially, I have to remain on medication for the rest of my life.
Okay. And
I'm very vigilant about it. And I practice what I call the 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time I eat clean and I do what I'm supposed to. 20% of the time you just got to have that pizza.
Well, otherwise, what is life about?
Exactly. There is also that aspect of hedonism in me. And let's not forget, I hosted Top Chef Canada also for about 3 seasons. So
food must have been great.
I'm a big foodie. I love food. I know that there are some people for them food is just fuel. For me, food is life. Food is just love.
I have to stop myself. Otherwise, I would just binge eat all day.
Really? It doesn't show. It doesn't show at all.
That's very nice of you to say. So Top Chef Canada. So how was that experience?
That was also a beautiful experience and very transformative for me on a few different levels. Obviously, it's a very popular and successful franchise. And it was beautiful to be a part of that. At the same time, having suffered from food disorders and food eating disorders, for me to be a part of that and to present myself as a healthy, wholesome woman, very proud and very comfortable in my skin, was a sense of personal triumph for me. to be able to host a show that's all about eating and celebrating food definitely brought me full circle as well in my own personal journey.
That's what life is about, finding your own path.
Yeah.
You have 2 daughters.
I do.
How old are they?
They are 16-month-olds.
Oh, God.
They are, I'm going to have to bombard you with photographs after this.
I'm looking
That's what
forward.
we do as mothers. They're incredible. Sophie and Soleil.
Yes. I saw Soleil is very French.
Soleil is very French. In combination, Sophie and Soleil make soufflé, which we did not plan, but it happened. We literally didn't plan it, but we realized it later. And they are delicious. They're just absolutely beautiful girls, delicious. I'm so looking forward to sharing the world and seeing the world through their eyes. I'm very conscious. It's a very different world that they're inheriting from when I was growing up. So we're very conscious of that. I think that, environmental issues are top of the head these days, and they should be. And of course, I imagine they might have some identity issues. I definitely struggled with it, but not as much as I did. Because fortunately, with the world that we live in today, the globalizer, look, they're Canadian kids who we had them via surrogacy in the Republic of Georgia. They were born in Georgia, and then they went to Hong Kong, and now they're in Bombay. Mm-hmm. So in their short life, they've already experienced a lot. But I think that that's gorgeous. I personally have this theory that really the greatest hope that we have for perhaps transforming our world to one that's compassionate and open-minded is through people of mixed blood. Because you can't help but then see the world through different eyes, right? You can't help but not be so dogmatic. How can you be dogmatic in one point of view when you are the product of multiple points of view, So I certainly hope, and obviously Canada is at the forefront of that, I think that in Toronto today, we see this extraordinary social experiment where there's this new generation that is the product of so many diverse backgrounds, and that's just very much a natural thing today.
Mm-hmm. Now that you have 1 book out, what is next for you?
And now I'm addicted. Now I feel personally very humbled and gratified that the book has been met with love and with acceptance. And in fact, I'm going to start embarking on the whole Lit Fest circuit in India now. We're having a wonderful event also at Canada House in Delhi, and I'm deeply grateful for that because, as I said, I feel that it's also, as much as it's an Indian book, it's also a deeply Canadian book as well. And I'm going to continue that circuit, and now I've just signed on to write 3 more books with my publisher, HarperCollins India.
This is very exciting. So I'm looking forward to reading the coming books because that one is totally worth anybody's time. So please go and get your copy of Close to the Bone. Thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us today.
Thank you, Annie. This has been wonderful. I could have gone on. And I mean it when I say it, that, you should have maybe like a side
That's my side
business
project.
in interviewing. This was honestly so much fun.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate you taking the time, and I cannot say enough. This book was deeply touching, so well written. So please go get your copy. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this passionate conversation with Lisa Ray. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We hope that you will join us next week for an episode with Parmesh Shahani from India Culture Lab.
We are thrilled that you shared this time with us today. We'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on our social media channels. On Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, we are at Canada in India. You can listen to all our episodes wherever you get your podcasts, so please do subscribe. Thank you. Merci. Dhanyavad.